Hey everybody, welcome to Watches with Dennis. And I think I started about a minute late on this. I was trying to get some better lighting, but unfortunately the camera is very sensitive to the fact that the lighting is warm. So if I look a little orangish, that is because the auto adjust can only adjust so far. So anyway, again, welcome. I appreciate those of you who are able to join live and those of you watching the recording. I hope you enjoy the programming. Today, my plan was to go ahead and focus on Seiko. And I really chose that mostly because there have been a number of Seiko announcements that have been happening over the last, I'd say, couple of weeks, really. And I expect them to continue onward. And that's probably due to the fact that it's the 110th anniversary of Seiko. And hey, Kevin, good morning. I hope things are going well out in Florida. It is very rainy out here today. I opened my curtains to get some natural light in to try and not let things be quite so orange. So I could try and turn this light off and see how bad it is. All right, actually, that's not too bad. We'll go ahead and leave that off. So it works better in Zoom. So I'll just be a little grainy instead. So before we get started, actually, I have three areas of Seiko that I want to go ahead and cover. I want to talk about a Prospex announcement that they recently had. Not the one that I've done. I did a video on some reinterpretation divers that have come out recently. I'm not going to obviously rehash that because I've already covered those on a standalone pre-recorded video. And also, I want to talk a bit about some of the Seiko 5 Sports. They have some 36 millimeter field watches that they've brought back, which I think are interesting to discuss. And finally, I think I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the Presage line. I don't know if I've ever covered the Presage watches before, and they're not an area. Just my monitor. They're not an area that I've historically looked into, but there were 4 new versions that have recently dropped on those, and so I thought, okay, well, let's go ahead and make a morning of it and do that as well. So that's sort of the basic lineup that I'm planning on in terms of uh, some preliminary stuff. I guess while we wait, because I started this a little bit later than I had scheduled it. I tried to put all this together this morning. I thought I'll be done by 9:35 Central, and I was almost, but not quite ready. And so in terms of just like going on, obviously I have been able to put out a few more videos lately. February was bad for me because I'm really busy work wise, and this is just a hobby channel that I do. So that is not totally resolved yet. January through March are my busiest time of year, with the order basically being February, March, January. But this last week actually gave me a good opportunity to actually do some watch content. So hopefully you've all been who have been able to catch any of those have enjoyed those. And then of course Watches and Wonders is coming up. So we are expecting to actually be more news. And this channel relies a lot on news because I don't have any relationships with watch manufacturers. I don't get in watches to review. All the watches I've reviewed are watches I have owned. And so, short of borrowing some other watches, you basically have to wait for my collection to rotate, which I have done from time to time. Now I'm wearing my Seiko Prospex today because we're talking about Seiko. So I figured I'd wear my one Seiko that I own. And then I should have another watch to review coming up eventually. I actually, just in terms of, I guess, watch news updates involving me, I am in the process of trading out 5 of my watches to get a new watch, to get a higher end watch. And so I'm hoping that I've actually sent those watches off. I'm using the watch box actually in this instance. They had a watch I've been eyeing for quite a while. And so assuming that all goes through as expected, then I'll probably get the watch next week, and I would expect to be able to do some level of reviews. Um, Hey, Mike. Good morning. Of course, you're too busy. You're too busy to stick around, but thanks for stopping by. I do appreciate it. And Obese Tuna is here. Hi, Obese. We're gonna talk Seiko today. I was killing a little time, a little intro. People are connecting. Figured I'd give a little bit of the watch updates there. So, Seiko. Okay. Actually, not a brand that I'm very familiar with. So this will be interesting. And so those of you in chat who are far more familiar with Seiko, because I know there are a lot of, maybe disciples isn't the right word, but there are a lot of enthusiasts. That's the word I want. Enthusiasts. There are a lot of Seiko enthusiasts out there. Seiko is a fascinating brand. It's just overwhelming in terms of its quantity. So it's a storied brand. It's been around a very long time. A lot of collectors get their start in Seiko because historically they were very affordable watches. At least a number of the units were, and that is still true to this day, though not as affordable, of course, as it once was. But Seiko has such a breadth of options that I have seen. I've gone on YouTube and I've watched a number of state of collection videos that people put together. I have seen people that have 100% Seiko collections. So it's a brand that you can lose yourself in and say, hey, this is where I want to be. I'm going to be brand loyal, and you can actually have quite a bit of diversity. I would actually, in my opinion, say that with Seiko, I see more diversity in watch style in a number, not all, because some people get very focused and they end up like just buying all the same sort of like dive watch look, for example. But I've seen more diversity with a 100% Seiko collection than I do with a 100% Rolex collection. Now, part of that is probably because the oyster case is on almost all of the popular Rolex models, and so you get the same profile of a watch, and they look very samey to me until you look at the dial. And with Seiko, if you stick with one lineup, you could end up like that. But obviously, if you go different approaches, even within a line like Prospex, if you go like dive versus air, just even the case shapes can start to vary. So before we go into like some of the recent releases, let's do a little bit of background. So let's shrink me down super teeny tiny. And this is where at SeikoWatches.com. And so here is, let me scroll it a little bit so you can kind of see it. There we go. That's good enough. All right. So this is how Seiko describes their current selection broadly in terms of what their collections are. So just in terms of a quick summary, because if you're like me, you don't know what all of these are. And so I looked at them all ahead of time while I was putting this episode, my show notes together. So the first one they have listed is Prospex. I would loosely say Prospex is their professional sports line. So these are the watches that are supposed to meet some sort of standard, essentially, for usability. So they're really about people that want to wear their watch doing something. And with it, when I hear Prospex, I always think dive watches. So these are like where they have their certified dive watches, but it's more than dive. They do it actually as a land, sea, and air sort of set. And so that's where all of the professional specification watches, in fact, that's what Prospex stands for, is professional specification. So Prospex is where you go when you're wanting, like, I'm going to use my air quotes, real sports watches. So then there's Presage. Presage is their dress watch lineup. And those are, I'd say if you're looking at like heritage models of Grand Seiko, but you're not comfortable paying those prices, you may want to look at Presage, because there's a lot of those Japanese design styles that Seiko is known for on the Grand Seiko side. They do that in Presage as well. It's a very Japanese aesthetic. And just like anyone who's going into watches in general, like if you look at I'd say the three big powerhouses in manufacturing of watches, and I don't think it's really disputed, would be the Swiss, the Japanese, and the Germans. And they all have their own style that's generally seen within a particular company. Of course, there are exceptions. I've seen German companies that have done things more Swiss style, for example, especially when they rely on Swiss movements. But I digress. So anyway, Presage dress watches. The Astron is a GPS watch. So that's not much else to say about that. King Seiko, that was a historic line that was sort of in competition with Grand Seiko back when mechanical precision was the big focus of Seiko. This was pre-quartz, obviously. So they've revived King Seiko, but King Seiko's approach is still mechanically focused watches. They have their own aesthetic, but they keep it within Seiko proper. Grand Seiko's been spun off from Seiko, but King Seiko in today's world is a step below Grand Seiko. It's not at the same caliber, and the pricing will reflect that. But the King Seiko prices do tend to be higher than some of these other Seiko lines we've talked about. Speaking of pricing, you see the five sports listed next. This is commonly called the Seiko 5. And sports is a little bit, I think it's a little misleading that they call this collection the 5 sports, because Seiko 5 within it, we'll click on it in a moment, actually. It's so interesting because they actually have a whole bunch of carve outs, kind of like how I told you Prospex was land, sea, and air. Under the Seiko 5 line, you've got like the street line, you've got the more sporty line. These don't always meet particular specifications. There was a lot of backlash, as I recall, when like the SKX was retired and Seiko started pushing some of the people that were into those sort of things into Seiko 5, and they had things like lower water resistance ratings and such, which didn't sit well with everyone. But it is what it is, and that's the decision they've made. Seiko 5 is the entry level point for Seiko at this stage. So if you're thinking you want affordable Seiko watches, the most affordable that you can find, you would start with Seiko 5 and then work your way up from there. The Cortura line is those are more modern designs, so they don't have the same sort of classical watch look. I think they go with a little more. I don't want to say avant-garde per se. It's just they're more modern. They're just more modern in their shape and design. I believe they're all solar watches as well. So that's another sort of quartz approach that you can go. And then the diamond collection is kind of what it sounds like. If you want the look of diamonds on your bezel, look at the diamond collection. Then that's where those watches are. So let's actually dive in very briefly into the 5 sports before we talk about, because we're going to hit on some of these today. So just to give you a sense of it, because I know a lot of people where they collect Seiko 5. I was going to say they collect Seiko and they focus on Seiko 5, I should say. There are some people who go Seiko and they only do Seiko 5 because there are a lot of watches. And the price points have been relatively approachable. So it gets really easy for people who maybe have a couple $100s to start saying, hey, I want a new watch. And they go and they get a Seiko 5, and then they get another couple $100s and they get another Seiko 5. And they can look quite a bit different. So here's the sports style. You can see like it's got the 4 o'clock crown position, and it looks this sports style to me looks a lot like the Prospex dive watches. They're not going to have the same specs. They're not going to have the same water resistance, for example, but the look is there. So if you're after the look, it's a more affordable approach. Then you've got the suit style, which to me looks a lot like the sports style, except the bracelet's basically getting changed up, and the same sort of being said with the specialist style, different case color, more of a leather strap look. So you see some of this stuff, they still follow like these dive timing bezels and such up through a point. So that's what all the way through Sense are. Then you start getting into the more field watch style, which calling it field sports would make sense. Field suits, again, a dressier version of the field sports. So you see a lot of these are very, very similar sort of styles, and they got their specialist style. And these are still very field watch oriented. So broadly speaking, Seiko 5 in their vast quality or quantity of options mostly have dive style watches and field style watches from what I have seen. But again, there are a lot of them out there. So let's go ahead and jump to a blog to watch and start talking about some of the new releases I did not do standalone videos for this week, which, I mean, there were a lot of announcements, not like Watches and Wonders a lot, but there were a number of announcements, and Seiko over the last couple of weeks has had several, and I only really did one. So this is the Prospex 1970 Divers Modern Reinterpretation Naomi Umura Limited Edition watch, or the SLA 069. Now, this design of this watch is the Captain Willard. If you're familiar with Apocalypse Now, it's one of Seiko's got a lot of iconic watches that people remember. That's sort of what the shape of this watch is. But obviously, the aesthetic is very different. Let's see if actually this is pretty blown up as it is. So you can get a sense here of the dial design. This is actually a more complicated dial. This is Mont Blanc, I believe, and in fact, it's the so Naomi Umura. I'm probably missaying that name, and I apologize. Is a famous mountaineer and climbed Mont Blanc, climbed Everest, climbed Kilimanjaro, climbed a bunch of mountains. So anyway, so on this, there's this textured dial, which I think is really nice. I actually really am quite fond of white dial watches. I only own one at this point, but it's the watch I've owned the longest. And so I've always been a real fan of white as dials. I think it's a nice classic look. Obviously, you've got this relief of the. I guess this is from the angle that mountain was summited, and other than that, you got a lot of the sort of traditional turtle styles. You've got your cushion dive case. It's a Prospex, so it's going to be dive certified. You see, it's there's the Prospex symbol down below the hands. It's a 200-meter water resistance watch. 430 date window, which is pretty common for a lot of these turtle style watches. Not all, depends on the movement that are used. So this is a limited edition watch. It's limited to 500 pieces. And so here's the original Captain Willard, if you couldn't remember what that looked like. So you can see a lot of the case design is there. Obviously, the date's in a different position on this modern interpretation. Also, the modern one has more water resistance, but a very interesting watch. Now, I also like that they've made a different color around the coin edging of the bezel, so and as well the crown. For again, it provides a nice bit of contrast against the stainless steel case. Now, this watch is not cheap, and that's where when we talk about Seiko, we have to think about as well, not just all of their history and all their different watch lines, but affordability isn't something that you can apply to Seiko as a brand anymore. There are some things like Seiko 5 that are affordable, and then there are some things where they start to get not affordable, and it's not even collection by collection. So this is a Prospex that I am wearing. This Prospex's retail price, I think, was around seven to $800. I forget, somewhere in that range. And then gray market, secondhand, whatever, because they made plenty of them. You could find this watch for even with taxes under 600. So again, and that applies to a lot of Seiko watches. So we're talking retail price though. We're talking a watch that was still well under $1,000 to this watch, which is 2,900. And again, part of it is probably that it's limited. Part of it's going to be this movement. So my watch that I am wearing uses a 4R movement. A lot of Prospex watches uses the 6R. And rule of thumb is the higher the number before the R, the better the movement. Now that's debated. I've had a number of people comment on some of the videos I have done, noting that even though the performance specifications on the 6R are better, like the accuracy range out of the box, so to speak, is better than a 4R movement. There have been more complaints purportedly about the 6R movement having issues like needing servicing versus the 4R, which is seen as more robust by a number of collectors. And so when I got this watch, my biggest disappointment was that it was a 4R, but I've had other people say, well, you should be glad that it's not a 6R. If you don't like your accuracy on your 4R, you should open it up and just regulate it or adjust it, I should say. Adjust it yourself. Regulation is something a watchmaker does. So this uses an 8R, the our 8L, I guess, the 8L36. I think is what the movement is. Let's see if we can find it here. 8L35. I was a number off, but it's an 8L. So this is something that Seiko's used for a while. They tend to put it in their upper end dive watches. Doesn't have the same power reserve that we're seeing out of some of the 6Rs. I know some of the 6Rs have 3-day power reserve. That was one in a recent diver reinterpretation watch that was just announced that I did a standalone video on earlier this week. Has a 72-hour power reserve. This is a 50-hour power reserve. This does beat at 4 hertz, so it's not too surprising that it would be less power reserve than 3 hertz movements, which is something Seiko often uses, especially in their more affordable watches, is 3 hertz. You can get more power reserve out of 3 hertz movement. But again, $2,900 US is a pretty steep price for a lot of people and again, that's where the challenge for Seiko comes in, for a Seiko. And I see Obese has noted in the chat that the old Seiko 5 was much more affordable, more of an Orient, and that he's more of an Orient fan these days. And I think that's something that I'm curious about with Seiko. Excuse me. With Seiko as a brand. And that's something I kind of wanted to talk about with those of you who are on live, and something for those who are watching the recording to think about and feel free to comment on in the comment section. But so what do you think is Seiko's strategy at this point? Are they saying we want to move up market, and Orient, which they also own, is going to be the entry level point for mechanical watch? Let's focus on mechanical, for mechanical watch collectors. Or are they saying we want to be an affordable watch option on one end? I should probably do it on this side of the screen for you guys. On one end, and then we're going to add like Prospex and Presage and all of that, and we want to take up all of this space all the way up until we get to this part, and then Grand Seiko begins. So I'm not clear. I'm not clear on it, but it's definitely come up a lot because one of the things that there was a lot of backlash on when they first brought back King Seiko is King Seiko is using these 6R movements, but the price point on them is like what $1,500, $1,600 MSRP. So it's it's pretty steep for when you can consider you could get like 6 hour watches also like closer to $1,000 or under $1,000. And those are the sort of challenges that a lot of people have had. And much like Obese Tuna had pointed out, back before we started doing the whole 4 hour, 6 hour, you go the SKX days and stuff, very affordable watches. Are the movements today better? I think spec sheet wise, yes. I think having watches that couldn't hack, having watches that you couldn't even hand wind, there was a lot to not like about those movements. I know a lot of people find them very quaint, but that doesn't mean they were good like that. They were a good design from all aspects, but they were very robust. So they had that going for them. But obviously, going back to this reinterpretation of the Captain Willard watch, we're talking a Prospex watch that's almost $3,000, and you really have to start considering when you're getting to that price point, like what are you running up against? Like, do you say you want to? Let's say you want to start looking at Tudors, right? Well, you can get no, not a dive watch. You can start getting into Tudor at under $2,000 if you start talking like Tudor 1926s. So, and then obviously, if you're still going with third-party movement Tudor, you can save quite a bit. But MSRP wise, I'd say roughly you're going to need to add about $1,000 more to compare on the Tudor dive side. And I'm sure they're going to say, well, this is a limited watch, Dennis. This is limited, so this is going to command more money than their non-limited lineup of watches, which is fair. But I really struggle because I have no context because Seiko doesn't. They're like Omega. They don't think anything about dropping a limited edition, and the limited numbers aren't consistent. Like this one's 500. There was another limited edition watch that I talked about that they've got 4,000 of planned. And it's like, I don't even know why you're calling it limited at that point. We were into that in the pinball hobby too. Companies that are fond of name dropping something as limited, and then they say it's limited at 5,000 units. And you're like, what the heck does that even mean? So B says Seiko still have their essential line of very cheap quartz watches. Yes, and while not as cheap as like the old SKX days, the mechanical Seiko 5s are relatively. I feel they're still relatively approachable. I have to be careful because because I also own luxury watches. It can be very easy for someone like me to fall into the trap of thinking something is affordable when I've been in the watch game for so long that I don't want to lose sight of the forest for the trees. I've always tried to be very aware of how pricing is to be seen in things. And so to me, I think of anything that's under $500 as affordable. So maybe I should just declare it like that. Like I think a watch is affordable if it's under $500. If you're first getting into watch collecting, $500, even like maybe even, I think could be seen as some sticker shock. But I could also say $300 might be that same thing. And so someone might be like, oh, I want to get into watches, but I don't want to pull the trigger at 300. And I can see that, that sort of thing. So that being said, under 500, Seiko still got a lot of mechanical choices that you have. Obviously, Orient has far more, where you could start really looking at like at or under $200. They play in that pond really well. And to say another nice thing about Orient that I really like is even though Seiko owns Orient, Orient still relies on a lot of the movements they developed in house before they were acquired. And out of the box, again, I have to qualify that out of the box. Orient specification, like Orient's low end movements, have a greater tightness of tolerance than the Seiko 4R series of movements. That being said, I have heard more complaints about people saying their Orient was out of spec on their low end Orient than they do on the 4R. But anyway, again, that's why what's on paper and what's reality can vary. My Orient was within spec. I do own one Orient, just like I own one Seiko. Obese Tuna has noted he would struggle to pay Swiss money for a Seiko, and that's what I was trying to get at in a very wordy way. I think is true for a lot of people. I've on one of the Facebook groups I'm on, where people share a lot of their watch photos. I've seen a few people, and granted, they're what I would call higher end collectors. Like a lot of their collections consist of Rolex, but they like Seiko too. But when they see things like this, when they see things like this. Mont Blanc reliefed, whatever they're calling it, the 1970 diver modern reinterpretation, they can't pull the trigger at 2,900. they could afford it, but to them, Seiko, they can't pay $3,000 for Seiko on the dial. And I don't even know. I've never asked them. Could they do it if it said Grand Seiko on the dial? But I think we all know who have been in the watch game for a while, that's been the big struggle. Grand Seiko used to be a great deal. Sorry, occasionally I have to pause to drink. I'd say Grand Seiko by and large is a fair deal today, but years before I was a collector, because I really only started collecting watches around 2020. But more around like the 2015, 29, well, maybe 17, 18, really around when Grand Seiko got spun off as its own thing. I think that was probably around 2018, if I remember right. It was a good deal. It was a good deal. The brand wasn't well known outside of Japan. You got all this excellent finishing and stuff, and they haven't dropped their standard, but they've raised their prices as demand has grown for their watches. So anyway, I think it's just really interesting. And because of that, let's drop to another Seiko model. We'll stay with a blog to watch for this one. And my description of my video has links to all three of these articles we're going to talk about today, so you can go and read them. Because obviously, the way I've got it set up, you're not really going to be able to read the articles for us talking about here. That's what going to the sites are for. We're not trying to poach their viewers. I just need their photos. So this is, again, as I'd mentioned, it's the 110th anniversary of Seiko. So in honor of that, they're doing a bunch of releases. More releases than normal, probably not. I think Seiko, I'm trying to remember. And in fact, I think it was on a Blog to Watch's podcast I was listening, and I think they said last year, this is per some other site, that Seiko dropped more watches in 2022 than there were days in 2022. So that's another topic we could have a conversation about. Is Seiko releasing too many watches? I'll go ahead and just say yes, they are releasing too many watches. There's no excuse to release 300 SKUs in a year, much less 365 or whatever. But that's my opinion. Okay, so Presage is not a lineup that I've ever really focused on very much. They've come out with 4 new. The case shape is standard to what we normally see with the Presages. I want to focus on the photos though. So Presage is very much a dress line that Seiko does. A lot of the motifs that are used in the Presage line, I think, are, as I noted at the start of the video, very Japanese. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of Japanese aesthetics in the dial design and such. These actually look a little more Swissish to me. Very odd configurations, though, in my view. So here it looks like we've got these all have central seconds, but they're using the rest of the dial space in a very creative way. So this is obviously, because there's a central seconds, this is not a sub-seconds register. This is a day. Or I should say date. This is the date register. I'm guessing this must be a power reserve off on the left. I probably should have read this article more closely or read it again before starting to talk about this. Whereas here we've done a different configuration. Again, date at the bottom. It's got a day function, pointer, basically pointer day on the right, and then power reserve still on the left. So makes sense. Little busier dial, too busy for me. And then we've got a blue iteration, which is the same thing as this cream iteration in terms of dial configuration and general look. I think a couple of these are limited. And then the white version, which is the same as the red watch we talked about, just a different dial color. So basically 2 different dials with 4 different watches. I don't like any of these, quite frankly. Maybe some of you watching feel differently. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, I do not like cropped. I don't like cropped hour markers if they're spelled out. Now, for me, the most egregious are when you crop Arabic numerals. I think it looks the worst. But I also don't like the cropping of Roman numerals. I get it. It's a very historically accurate approach. Like in pocket watch era, it would be seen as okay, common, acceptable, elegant, whatever word you want to apply. To take a small seconds and crop out part of the 6 o'clock position where you'll see part of the numeral, but not all of it. I hate it though. I hate it as an aesthetic. I don't hate it as much as I used to, because I see more and more watches that I really like, and then it gets me, and I'm just like, ugh. But here, I see everything else is fully even. So they shorten it. I'm okay with shortening indices. So that this looks better on the 9 to 3 axis than it does the 12 to 6, or I should say on the X axis versus the Y axis. That said, I do like this configuration better than this because I think this just looks too busy. Again, this cropping, fine. The 6, I don't like the cropping there. Here you have the balance on your X-axis because of how they've inset the power reserve and the day indicator. But it just, I don't know, with the texturing, because these are like all sunken. It reminds me of that complaint. If you've seen some of the older, they still make them, but some of the older, in particular, spring drive watches, not the oldest ones where they printed on the spring drive power reserve, but later on, like Snowflake and stuff, they started to sync it. They'd sync it in to the dial, and that just tilted a bunch of collectors. They couldn't get. I actually was okay with that. That one, I didn't love it. I did prefer the print look, but I was like, it wouldn't stop me from buying the watch. The sunken aspect to it wouldn't prevent me from buying the watch, but these watches are way too busy for me. Now, pricing wise, now these all use 6R. These are 4 hertz 6R movements, so they're 45 hours power reserve, and you get the better out of the box accuracy versus the 4R. But you can see, okay, so the white enamel one that we looked at, which one was that? That's this one. That one is priced at $2,000 and is limited to 1,500 units. And then the red one is 1,850, also at 1,500 units. Okay, so they're all limited. The cream one is 1,850 as well. And then the blue one is 2,050, but that one's lifted for whatever reason. That one's limited to 800 instead of 1,500. Did I say that's the blue one? Blue one's got, I would say the blue one's the best looking one. It doesn't have the cluttered dial. Do they have a better close up of that? Well, yeah, I guess this one. But I do like this sort of texturing. I can't tell if they just did semicircles or if this is like a guilloche circle all throughout. To me, it looks like they did little arcs. Regardless, it's attractive. It's attractive. I still would never go for it. But so Presage, yeah, that's I mean, at those prices, like, all right, so those are $2,000 watches. And I mentioned the Tudor 1926 earlier. I'm gonna search for that while I talk. And the reason I bring up the Tudor 1926 is I used to own one. So and I think the Tudor 1926 is a very nice sort of substitute for the date just. And again, if you're going with the ones that don't have the diamonds on the dial, which again wouldn't be my particular style, their MSRP is like $1,950. So I'll throw one up here really quick just so you can get a sense of it. So this is actually the color scheme I got. You can get these with leather bands, and or obviously you can always do a third party. But if you wanted it more dressy, you see 2,000. This one's got the diamonds on it. That's why it's so expensive. There are leather ones without that. Like this. There we go. 1,850 because you didn't get the steel bracelet. So zoom in, and you see you get this. It's a Swiss watch, textured dial, gilt hands, gilt numerals, no weird cropping, little normal indice cropping. I loved the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 approach on the dial. I just had too many time plus date function watches, so I ended up selling mine. But that's cheaper than that's cheap. Not to mention you can get those on Joma Shop hundreds less. But just like you'll be able to get the Seikos for less. But it's quite a bit cheaper and arguably a more pedigreed brand because Seiko still has, for better or worse, the baggage of being affordable Seiko because it still kind of wants to be affordable Seiko. So that's where I think what Seiko doing as a brand is both fascinating and concerning. I'm not a shareholder in Seiko, so I'm not overly concerned with what they do. But it is interesting. And it's such a successful brand that it's nice to see them do well because I don't think as a collector, I don't want to live in a world where it's only Swiss watches. And so having a powerhouse out of Japan, I think is really, really nice. Now, speaking on the affordable side, I saved this for last because I know so many people love the Seiko 5 line. It's an entry point for a lot of people. A lot of people focus on just collecting Seiko 5s at this point. So this one I saw over on Hodinky. Again, link is in the video description, so you can go actually read the article. But yeah, this article was only from a couple days ago, but I believe this announcement, I think the press release was a week or two ago. So I missed it originally, so I didn't do a standalone video on these. But so they brought back the field watch in 36 millimeter. Now that's really interesting. So and there's 6 different versions of it. So I mean, they're all the same. It's just the dial color and strap configuration varies by these watches. So to me, it's very well. Let me qualify that again. The dial color, strap configuration, and the dial layout varies for these. Just not these 3 that you see right here. So I think this is a smart move in the sense that field watches historically are smaller watches. A lot of the true traditional mil spec field watches are 34 millimeters. Marathon, the Canadian company that has supplied a lot of field watches to various militaries around the world, they continue to rely heavily on 34 millimeter as an option, and the 36, I think, is a really good size. I did own a 36 millimeter Marathon in my case. Hamilton, the khaki field, they make a number. They don't go down to 36 to my knowledge in the khaki field line. They do go down to 38 though. So anyway, in terms of these watches, so specification wise might be worth, I think Hodinky puts specs at the end. So let's jump down to those. Okay. So again, these are all 36 millimeter. They're 44 and a half lug to lug. So very wearable for a lot of people with smaller wrists. 18 millimeter lug width. So that's a good one for straps change outs. This did surprise me a bit. So 12.5 millimeters is not a thin watch. And I had, excuse me, and I had to start doing some research because I was like, is that unusually thick for a field watch? I'm not sure because I'm not an expert in field watches. I think it is. I think it is a bit unusually thick. I went back and looked at the specs on my old Marathon. I don't remember the reference number. I don't own it anymore. And it's about a millimeter thinner as a mechanical, and it's a mechanical watch as well. They advertised it as 39 millimeter, but that included the crown. It's 36 in terms of traditional measurement. And then I pulled up the Hamiltons, like the 38 millimeter Hamilton khakis. I found one of those, and I believe that was 9.5 or so. It was under 10. It was under 10 millimeters. So the one thing here, though, that I do want to specify why I'm not totally sure I want to double down too harsh on this is it is 100 meters of water resistance. My Marathon, I believe, was officially, it was mil-spec 30, but they guaranteed it at 50. And the Hamiltons are at 50 meters of water resistance. So is this thicker because they wanted to obtain the 100 meters of water resistance? And so it's a little unfair of me to be critical of it. I'm not sure. I think 12.5, I feel like you really starting to get into dive watch thickness territory with that. And the whole idea of a field watch is it's supposed to be small so you don't get it hung up on stuff. But I know a lot of people would be an absolute no on any watch that isn't 100 meters of water resistance. There's some people that are like, no, absolutely not. And if you wear your watch, like if you're not a person into dress watches where it can be very hard to get watches that aren't 30 meters of water resistance, I get it. Like it's not a ridiculous decision to make that sort of choice. Actually, I see Von Kroll is here in chat, so I'm going to pause on our discussion of that lineup for a moment, and because he's posted a few things here. Can you buy parts for 6-hour movements? There isn't an NH3X equivalent for 6-hour movements that you can buy, as far as I know. I do not know. I do not know if Seiko is controlling the supply chain there, and you're forced to go to Seiko for movement servicing. I've never had anyone tell me one way or the other, and I've also never asked. I have heard people tell me that they've had some issues with their 6-hour movements, and the 6-hour movements have been, in their view and their experience, more prone to needing adjusting in some capacity. I don't know if they were broken or just inaccurate versus the 4-hour counterparts. So I have seen a number of people say they would rather have a 4-hour than a 6-hour. So, I guess take that into whatever consideration matters to you. Franco also notes, I'd rather have a hand wind only watch here to bring it closer to the 10 millimeter thickness. Now, that was the thing with my Marathon. It was only about a millimeter thinner, and it was hand wind only. And I don't know why that was the case, why it was still so thick. That was perhaps a design decision. If I were to guess, in the case of my Marathon, they needed additional space within the case because they use tritium tubes. And so you need more clearance, or they were maybe worried about having more clearance because all their indices have tritium tubes. The hands are carrying tritium tubes. And so because they chose not to use something like LumaBright, Superluminova, or whatnot, they were forced to make that sort of sacrifice. That the Hamilton is thinner. And I assume the khakis were, back in the day, the ones I looked at were hand wind only, them being more around, like, I think they were like 9.5-ish, 9 point something-ish, would make sense. In fact, I'll pull up a Hamilton here while we think about that. Khaki, 38 millimeter. Make that search. I see Ron Kroll also has noted, well, I load that up. The 50 meters of water resistance, what I want a field watch. 30 meter water resistance would be no bueno. Yeah, and it's interesting to know that back in the day, 30 was the mil spec. And that's probably why Marathon, I think in the back on the branding, they stamped the guaranteed mil specs that the watch, the one I had, which was built around the 1980s, I think, or 70s request. So it says 30 meters there, but then in the manual of the book, it specifies that they've rated it to 50 meters. They just put the exact mil spec things in the stamp because that's what they would have been required to do with the military. So here's a quick look at a khaki field. This is an automatic, 38 millimeter, $675 watch. That'll be useful to note. So the Seiko is going to come in cheaper than that. But so in terms of the features, though, that's the strap reference. Let's just take the reference number here because they're not listing the thickness on their site. They are being naughty. Let me do a Google search. Review. Let's see. There's a review. Watch review blog. Pop that up. What do they say? Did they measure it? I always measure the thickness. Maybe not my earliest reviews before I had calipers, but all right, 11 millimeters. So even their automatic is thinner than this Seiko. But you do get the 100 meters water resistance. Now, in terms of these new watches, I've mentioned there's 6 configurations. So you've got this black, tan, and another black, though you've got the Fotina going on here. Let's see. Yes, Hodinky lets us zoom in. Okay. So you've got the Fotina Lume. These all have LumaBright. Here, that's kind of matching the dial of the tan one. This obviously comes on a NATO, like an olive NATO strap. This comes on a tan NATO strap. And then this one comes on the steel bracelet. These are all kind of what I think of as US mil-spec style looking watches, where you have the hour markers, Arabic hour markers on the exterior of the dial, and then the military time on the interior of the dial, other than where they've put the date in here. And then on the other 3 watches that they've got, well, we've got this silver and green one on leather straps. These are following more of the Flieger style, Flieger type B style. So you'll see the exterior hour marker is, and we'll zoom in a bit, is going around. This is actually not hour markers. These are the minute markers. And then the hours 1 through 12 are in the interior of the dial. So that's a type B Flieger approach, which they've got here with 2 different dial color combinations. And so it's 6 watches total, I thought. Oh, they've also got this. Okay, so they've also got a tan one that's doing the no, that's the same tan one. So maybe it's just 5 watches. All right, anyway, so they got a few watches. Apologies. Apparently Dennis can't count. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I don't know why I thought there were 6. Apparently I counted something twice. So they got a couple Flieger style, and then they've got the what I think of as the US military mil-spec style. I see Ron Kroll has another comment in the chat box. I feel most comfortable with the Sellita movement for parts availability, but Miyota are okay too. There's no commonly used Miyota that you can't buy, as far as I know. Yeah, and the Marathon I had used a Sellita, I believe. I think it was it was an ETA. I think they may have still had access to ETA. Yeah, Sellita is great for availability, and also, yes, I am not aware of any limitations on Miyota. I've never heard of any. So in terms of serviceability, definitely something worth saying. Now, getting back to the specifications, we talked about the 100 meters water resistance and all of that. Pricing. All right, so these are using 4-hour movements, so people tend to like those better. You trust them more from the commentary I've heard. That means they're 3 hertz movements, only 40 hours power reserve. So not a particularly impressive power reserve, but that's pretty standard for the 4-hour movements. I think my Prospex is about 40-hour power reserve with its 4-hour movement. $290. So $300. These are not limited. $300 watch, and using their lowest tier movement. These are not sapphire crystal. These are hardlex. Very thick for a field watch, in my opinion. 12.5, especially against a 36 millimeter watch. Part of their thickness might, in addition to the water resistance, may have been this decision, which I'm not a big fan of. Display case back. I wouldn't attribute necessarily too much to it. Normally, though, you can expect at least a somewhere, well, I don't know what, 0.1 millimeters, I suppose, at a minimum, must have been added by going with a sapphire, or excuse me, this is not sapphire, with going into the display case back. I'm assuming another hardlex crystal display case back for the back for an undecorated movement. Now, I understand to a degree, because the Seiko 5 line is sort of an entry level lineup. A lot of people who are buying into watches like this, it could very well be their first watch. And when you're getting your first watch, first mechanical watch, a lot of people really want to see the movement. That's part of that's part of the allure of having a mechanical timepiece, because the allure isn't accuracy. So it's that romanticism of these gears and a spring powering it. And so I get the idea to show it off, even though it's like completely undecorated. So again, this is where I don't want to come across as snobbish, and having owned decorated movement watches, I have lost all interest in undecorated movements. I just needed to declare that. So, and you'll get decorated movements at around the $1,000 price point. So that's where when I see something like this, and it's not just Seiko, Tudor doing this, like on their silver and gold watches to show off their in-house movement. Their in-house movement is Spartan. It is Spartan. It is not. It's like they don't do anything to it. It's like, I get that a lot of decoration, like Omega's decoration on most of their watches that you see, is machined. That's fine, though. It's decorated. I'm not asking for hand decorated movements here. I'm just saying it should look better than this if you're going to show it off. Here, I get it from a collector standpoint, but from a field watch standpoint, I think it was a mistake. So I wouldn't expect a field watch to have a display case back. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It added to the thickness, and it's such an unattractive movement. I as a collector don't like it, but where Seiko as a company is coming from is probably like, well, this is an under $300 watch. This might be someone's first mechanical watch. They're going to want to see the movement. So I get that as well. Steve Franco said the NH3X movements are quite robust. Nothing to show off with an exhibition caseback, but they're solid and economical movements. And he's also brought up the Type B Flieger is appealing to me. I'm about to build one with the Chinese clone of an ETA Unitas 6497. I am a fan of the Flieger Type B. In fact, I switched because today was Seiko Talk Day. I switched to my Seiko. But yesterday I was wearing my Stova Flieger that I bought last year on one of their Christmas sales. That their Christmas sale ended short this year because they do an advent calendar sale annually. And what they do is they take all the movements that they take to show, or movements. They take all the watches they take to shows. So they've been handled. They're not brand new. And they put new straps on them and they sell them at a discount. So that's how I got my Flieger. And it has a display case back, and it's hand wind only, and it's a Type B. And the Type B is so unique. To me, I get why the Type A is more popular, because it's real easy to read the time. And in today's world, it makes more sense to have the hours around the exterior than sticking the hours where they're harder to read, because these, as recon watches, the Type B Flieger was designed for Luftwaffe bombing runs. And so the minutes were more important to the recon person. That's why they ended up shifting from the Type A to the Type B style as the war went on. That being said, I don't like the day date being on it. Totally. I don't like the day date on any of these. And if I were to whine about Seiko broadly, and hey, it's my Seiko episode, I guess I can do what I want, it would be, I wish they wouldn't put the day date on so many watches. I like it on some. I have it on my Prospex. It's got the the day date there off on the 3 o'clock position. It's just it depends on the watch and how well they integrate it. And so, like, let's look at these sort of like here, color match date window. I like this one. This one I'd be okay with. This one's my least favorite. The stark white just screams out the day and the date, and I think breaks up the symmetry of the dial in a way that it's not an ugly watch, but I definitely, this would be the one I wouldn't buy of these three. And then this one's in the middle. You've got this sort of textured black. The date window, of course, not going to be textured, but it still matches. And so I like this one. Okay, the one on the right. Okay. And then you go down to the Fliegers, and part of it's my bias because of my knowledge of the historic Type B Flieger. I don't want the date or the day on either of these, but it's Seiko. And can you name a Seiko watch, a modern collection mechanical Seiko watch that does not at least have the date? The only one I can tell you is some of the new King Seikos. That's it. I can't think of another one that doesn't have the date. A lot of them have the date. I get it because the movement can do it, and I don't want a phantom movement position. My movement in my Stova is a movement that would have a date, and I don't have the date on my Stova. It was an option, but I was like, no, I want it to be more authentic. I want it to be more symmetrical. They take out the ghost position, Stova does, so I don't feel it in there. So if I had to pick between having a ghost date and a date, go ahead and give me the date. But some of these would look so much better. These would be, I mean, imagine how much cleaner these would be. Again, the green one with that stark white is really broken up. I think the silver dial works better, so I would favor this one, even though I actually like the green more. Not with the date, I don't. So, but again, that's just me. I get it for Seiko with who they're selling to, and we hear this from all sorts of watch brands. So this isn't anything new. People, the average consumer, wants a date. The date watches sell better. That's why they do them, even though all the collectors are like, well, the symmetry of the watch is better without the blah, 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 blah. I mean, and there are some times where if I'm doing certain things at work and I look at the watch, I will still sometimes look down and if I'm signing checks or doing stuff, and it's like, I want the date on the watch sometimes. So I have some of my watches in my collection are date included on purpose because I actually do like the date having it, even though it's not as aesthetically pleasing on some of my watches. And then when it comes to my Type B Fliegers, I do not want a date there. I want it to be a Type B Flieger. I didn't have it originally. So, that's a dentist. That's just a dentist thing. That's a dentist problem that I have to live with. So Frankrol says there was a Type B Flieger from Escapement Time on AliExpress that was actually good, and I failed to buy it. Now Escapement Time sells a crappier version of it. I heard about that. I read an article about it. It's been a while. I'm not searching for it. I'm actually going to load up a Type B Flieger. But yeah, no, I remember someone really, maybe it wasn't maybe it was someone's YouTube channel. Someone did a review of the old one versus the new one, and was just like the old one was better in like pretty much every regard. The one I was going to show here really quick was, now Islander has some, they have a black one as well. I don't think it's as inexpensive, but they've been doing some Type B Fliegers, and I think they've done a pretty good job. My only complaint, actually, I got one of these for a friend of mine. He was really into a Type B Flieger, and I got black one. I didn't get this blue one. This is just the one that popped up on the search real quick. Closed case back. I don't remember what movement they used in these NH36. The only thing I didn't love about this, I liked almost everything. And the loom is great on it. Because I tested it before I wrapped it. Is I wish the hour hand here did not extend out past the inner hour ring. On the true Fliegers, they stay in. I'll pull up a Laco, which I'd say Laco is the most authentic look. Like, they haven't changed. Like, Stova's taken some creative liberties with the case shape. Like, it's more rounded and stuff now for more modern comfort reasons. But here we go. So here's a Type B Laco, and you can see how they keep the very tip. It's hard to see, but because it's black, but the very tip of the hand is right on that ring. I wish Islander had done that. Just right there. The hand is just a little too long. Otherwise, it's such a good design. It's such a good design that they did. I like it far better than the Seiko, though, I guess, is what I'm saying. So let's see. And Bronco says, I agree. No day or date on my Type B Flieger, please. Yes, yes. It's just it's more true. And LB says, I think every 5 has a date. I don't know the 5 lineup well enough to be able to say whether if they all had days or not. I do believe I've never seen one in the current listing that doesn't at least have a date. I know on like Prospex there are some with day dates and some with just dates, but I can't think of one without anything. King Seiko is the only one I know of. Let's see. Von Kroll says, I also don't like to set the date. I'm more likely to pick up a watch and wear it if it has no date. I prefer the hour hand to not extend past the inner hour track. Yeah, again, that's just how it, if you want to truly embrace the design, if you're going to make a Flieger clone, of Type B Flieger clone, make a Type B Flieger clone. I'm going to guess in the case of Islander, it might have been an issue with finding a hand that worked with the supply, their supply chain stuff and all of that, or maybe they use that hand in another watch and it's convenient that way. Are we watch bros? We're at least on maybe watch Flieger bros. And Rami has joined us. Welcome to the live stream, Rami. I'm glad you could catch it. The Islander looks better than the Laco. And again, aesthetic choices can vary. Now, I would ask Rami, do you like the Islander better because of the hour hand, or is it something else? Like, do you like that the dial color is different, or maybe the case shape? Because the case profile, I like the case profile of this Islander better. See how it curves? That's like a Stova. Whereas I didn't give you guys a good view of the Laco profile. The Laco profile is very traditional. So this is extremely flat. And because of its flatness, it can hang over your wrist, especially if it's a smaller watch. And Rami has added in, yes, the hands are more visible. Okay. Yeah. So, and again, that's probably one of the things I would say was that was my YouTube search for the Islander. Excuse me, my Google search, is the why I think most people today prefer Type A to Type B Fliegers is because the hours are so important in day-to-day life, right? More important, one might argue, than seeing this huge minute track. And so having the hours on the outside and having a longer hand that would point towards those makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, I think. So I get, it all depends also on functionality. I had a couple of watches that I really liked that were like the Omega Black, for example. But I'm not in the market for Omega Black. One is pretty pricey, but separate from that is that outside of like the really cool lumen stuff, I would struggle to read it. And while I love the aesthetic of it, the readability makes it a watch where I'm like, I just can't really go with it. I wanted to go ahead and throw up so this is Stova's. Here's one where they installed the date, which I didn't like. So in my case, I got one without one, but you can kind of see again, really stubby short hand. In this case, versus the Laco we looked at, the hands are blued though, so they're easier to read. So that's another factor is Laco's problem here, possibly that they didn't blue the hands. Now that's because I'm sure I loaded up. It's my fault. Yeah, $410. This is the one of the Miyota powered ones. For whatever reason, well, now I get why. Laco wanted to offer a more affordable option on their Flieger lineup. So on the affordable ones, they didn't blue the hands. They didn't heat blue the hands. However, they do have, like when you get up to the 1,300 price point, they started to blue the hands, and the blued hands are easier to read, especially in the light. So again, still stubby, but this is their more authentic. It's using a Swiss movement, and so it's Stova is the same way. They don't make their own movements. But it's easier than the black hand. I honestly, with the cheaper versions like the quartz version and the Miyota powered versions that Laco does, I still wish they would have at least just painted the hands blue. You can do a painted blue that doesn't look tacky. I think I've seen some. I think the Tudor 1926's blue is not heat blued, and it's an excellent blue. Very, very stark and very, very easy to see. Well, which I appreciate. And Vanko said that is the best case scenario for putting a date on a Type B Fleeker. Oh, yeah, the Stova version. Yeah, they with a little, they just do a little cutout. Stova's site is not great for photos. They might have some user photos, but it's hard to. I always found their site a little cumbersome, and by a little, I mean their site is honestly, it's one of the more horrific, websites out there for watches. Unfortunately, a lot of watch manufacturers seem to struggle to have a good website, but Stova, I think, is a pretty small company. Like I don't think they have any authorized dealers. I think you always buy direct for Stova, which is why they're not so easy to find used. Lacos you can find pretty readily, like on Chrono 24. There's often a lot of Lacos, and there are some ADs for Lacos, so you can go around and find some stuff. But yeah, I really struggled to zoom in on Fleekers and stuff. I had to find some other individuals. Well, like what Bronco noted here, rough time with their site with the photos. I had to go and like find reviews, videos, or articles, or like Watch You Seek posters who did their own photos. And I just turned to the community to be able to get better views, and that's where I could better see how the case curved, kind of like the Islander I'll put back up, which I really liked this how they've arced this case, the curved lugs in particular. Not as authentic though. So again, depends what you want. Laco will get you something far more. In fact, Laco will let you actually I think get the 55 millimeter version. It's super expensive. Like I don't remember. I thought it was closer to $5,000. But if you want a true, like, you want the Fleegers like they wore on the outside of the pilot jacket style Fleegers. I don't know anyone else that makes a big Fleeger like that. You know, another it's kind of funny. This is the Seiko show, but they've triggered us to talk about Fleegers now. It's their fault, really. There is another German brand that has some interesting Fleegers. Archimedes is their name, and I was going to see if I could maybe find some here that might be worth taking a look at. I'm trying to see, am I at their site in Germany or in German or not? Because they actually had some really cool bronze ones, is what I remember seeing, and I didn't go that route because I felt that I wanted one of the 5 original manufacturers. Along and Zona does not do Fleekers anymore. And Vempe is and IWC are very pricey. So here we go. Here's an example. I think we can get bigger on this at least a little bit. Yeah, fine. Give me my cookies. All right. So this is Archimedes. This is a bronze cased version, but they have a hand. Again, the hand doesn't extend past the line, but I think they make it very distinct and easy to read. So, and it's a fairly classical look of that. What there? They do a display case back. Stova likes to do display as well. Not decorated. I'd say less decorated than Stova does even, but 100 meters of water resistance. So that would compete with the Seiko. And I'm wondering if they say what the thickness is. See, 9.9 millimeters. And this is an automatic. They're using a 2824 here. So I don't know why the Seiko has to be, no, that's not the right Seiko. I don't know why these Seikos have to be fat. 12.5 millimeters. I don't get it. But anyway, those were the topics I thought we'd talk about on a calm, rainy for me Saturday morning as I look out the window and think how wet it is, and glad I'm not out there with but I wore my Seiko dive watch on our Seiko day, so I could get it wet. My Stova that I wore yesterday, I can also get wet in the rain, but I wouldn't swim with it. But that's pretty much it. When is Watches and Wonders? Does anyone know the dates? I don't recall. I guess that. Hey, let's just open another tab up here and do a Google search. Watches and Wonders 20. I thought it's the end of this month, but maybe it's in okay, March 27th through April 2nd. Okay, so it spans both. All right. So last year, before Watches and Wonders, Omega did a bunch of their drops. I think the week or 2 weeks before, maybe across both. So that's kind of what I'm expecting this year. Is we've started to see a little bit of activity. The watch sites. I did the video on the diver reinterpretation from Seiko earlier this week, which actually a lot of people have watched, a lot of people for a channel my size. I did a video on a Timex as well. And so I'm seeing some companies starting to get announcements out ahead of the game, especially those that uh, I don't believe either Timex or Seiko go to Watches and Wonders. I'm interested in what Omega might say, because they kind of, I don't want to say they stole thunder from Watches and Wonders last year, but they had some really interesting announcements. Like they had those really bright Aquaterras that got a lot of attention. Yes, they were compared to the Stella style dials of Rolex. I think the problem with the Aquaterras was Omega didn't put them out until I think they came out in January of this year. So that was such a rough time. Because I really wanted to. I actually went to one of our the Omega authorized dealer here in Kansas City, and they didn't have any. I wanted to look at it. I was going there because I actually couldn't get the bracelet links out of the Loctite was, even with a hair dryer, I could not break the Loctite on my 300M I ordered. And so I went there to have the watchmaker deal with it. And I was like, show me what you guys got. And they were able to show me like that discontinued, they made it for 6 months, that sort of classic style hand wind watch. That was pretty cool watch. And they showed me some of the other stuff, like their world timers and things. But I was like, do you have the Aquaterras? And they're like, they were telling us end of November, but we're not sure we're actually going to get them then. And they didn't. So it was like, and that was in October. So, but I'm curious to see what they do. Of course, we'll see a lot out of Watches and Wonders. A lot of it is just out of it's fun to talk about, but you know how it is with all of you who are watching or watch collectors know so much of the stuff that gets announced, it gets a lot like the Hodinky media attention. I mean, a lot of those are going to be six-figure watches. They're just watches that human beings don't buy, right? Well, not normal human beings. I say that and knowing myself that my own watch collection is already beyond what a lot of watch collectors would do in terms of the dollars that I've poured into it. And you think about it and you're just like, but everyone's got their next level of crazy. There's someone out there where no watch prices is crazy. All the watches are sane. They're all sanely achievable. But for the rest of us, there's always some level where it's just like the person who can do the $100,000 watch is like, I would never spend $500,000 on a watch. And then the person who will do a $50,000 watch would never buy $100,000. And then the 10,000 person won't buy a 20,000. And then there's a person who will buy $1,000, but not 5,000. And someone who will never go over 500 and someone who will never go over 300. And that's what makes it so interesting. And my lines in the sand have varied the more I've fallen down the rabbit hole. But of course, you can always sell and trade out watches, which, excuse me, initially I didn't look at doing, but it has become very important to me as my tastes have evolved and changed to be able to say, you know what, I can let this go. What's been interesting is letting go watches that I didn't think I was going to let go. Because there have been some watches where it's been a gamble, where I've been like, you know what, like the Marathon I bought. I was like, I'll try it out. And then to me, it was like, it was a nice watch. And I realized I just don't wear field watches enough. It's just not I mean, maybe you would count I forgot I don't have my stove on. You might count a pilot watch as a Flieger watch, or excuse me, a Flieger watch as a field watch. Some people do. But I just didn't wear it enough. So it's just like, it just had to go. Let's see. Got a few chats here. Ronco says, I got a bronze watch as an experiment, the Zealous HH3, and it was a success. The patina is really cool on it. No artificial acceleration, just wearing it. I had I guess still technically have a Tudor Black Bay bronze, and I would love to have the patina aged on it. I bought it used, so it was already patina. Didn't appear to be artificially patina. It just, by and large, it just got darker. The only hint of green it had was on the coin edge of part of the bezel. So you could really only see it with a loupe. I never cleaned it off. I never artificially accelerated it. That watch is a beefy boy. That watch is thick. And it's a 43 millimeter diameter watch because it's the original Black Bay, but the bronze version was 2 millimeters bigger in diameter than the standard Black Bays. They've since got the Black Bay 58, which would have been a better suit for me. The 43 millimeter diameter wasn't a problem. The 51 millimeter, like 51.2 millimeter lug to lug was really pushing it for me. I say kind of have because actually, and I covered this at the very beginning of the live stream when I would start killing time before going into the topics on Seiko. But I'm actually in the process of doing a watch trade with Watchbox, actually, one of the big online used watch dealers. And I'm trading in 5 of my watches as part of that deal. And that Black Bay is one of my sacrifices. So I won't have any more bronze watches after getting rid of that. But as a bronze watch, I loved it. I loved how it patinaed. I saw how so many others. I've seen the Zealous. I thought the Zealous has patinaed pretty well. I think Oris has a pretty good looking patina. I don't know if I would go with the bronze bracelets like they did on those cotton candy watches. That's mostly because I worry about skin irritation. I don't have overly sensitive skin. Like I don't have a problem wearing stainless steel watches. Um, but you're pushing it with the copper content in bronze, possibly. And their bronze looked more like a more coppery alloy than Tudor's bronze. So one of those things. And Bronco says Loctite 222 shouldn't be super hard to break. Loctite 290 may have been used. It's best for the crown, not for bracelet screws. I I don't know. I don't know. And I have watchmaker screwdrivers from when I was, working on like during the pandemic, and I take apart movements and try and put them back together. So I actually have like nice Swiss screwdrivers. I didn't have a good one though that was the sized for the bracelet. I didn't have that. So I've ordered since I added another one to my set because those are like $20 a screwdriver. I mean, they're not cheap. Because they're the what's the I'm looking off to the side, but that's not where I have the screwdriver. So I don't remember they're Bergeron. Like those are the screwdrivers I have. So anyway, so I only had cheap hollow ones that were and I was worried about either the tip of the hollowed out because it's a cheap hollowed out screwdriver. I was worried about either breaking the tip or more likely slipping and scratching the bracelet, which I'm used to putting. I have desk diving marks on that bracelet now, but I didn't need to do that. So I just thought, let me go in. It was kind of pricey. I would think they charged like $40 to do those links. But anyway, it was just one of those things. First time I ever failed to do my own bracelet. I was just like, holy cow. I felt like such a wimp because it's like I've all sorts. I've resized, Rolex bracelets. I've resized Seiko, Orient. Some of them have been nightmares. I'm not wearing it on the bracelet because I actually find the silicone band that this watch came with both. But the Seiko bracelet was one of the worst. Actually, Seiko and Grand Seiko are the two worst bracelet experiences I have ever had, not counting that I failed to do the Omega one myself. The Grand Seiko uses these tiny, I wouldn't be able to show you. They're like watchmaker screws on both ends of the links, at least on the Heritage model I had, and I dropped one. It bounced off the table and fell. I had to get out of shop vac, vacuum the floor, and then go through the shop vac with a magnet to find it. And they put like a pin, and then they use 2 little screws to hold the pin in. It's the weirdest. I'm like, I don't know why you're doing it like that. And then Seiko, of course, pin and collar. And I hate collars. It's actually the first time I ever sized a collar bracelet too. So that was just a nightmare. Cotter pins. If you don't want to pay for full screw, either do full screws, or if you don't want to do that, do what Orient does and just do a cotter pin. Cotter pins are fine. They work good. They're easy to remove. They're easy to put back in. I don't mind working on cotter pins. I don't mind working on full length screws as long as they don't have too much Loctite on them. Pin and collar, I hate. Tiny baby death sentence screws, I probably hate the most. I probably hate them more than the pin and collar. My biggest problem with pin and collar is I have to get out a loop to make sure I've seated the collar right. It's too hard for me to visually see it otherwise. That was my struggle. Taking them out wasn't a big pain. Putting them back in was a little bit. Granted, you only really size it once and then you're done. So I'm whining more than it probably deserves. But nonetheless, yeah. And yes, thank you. Bergeron. Yes. I bought a little pack of like 5. And then eventually I got a holder for those. And then I bought a bigger size one because I mostly just got the ones to work on the movement. So I have like the smallest size all the way up 4 more levels. And then I think there are 2 bigger ones that Bergeron regularly makes, like my little stand that can rotate, can hold 2 more. Like the green handled one was the one I ordered that can do, I think, a lot of the watch bands, but I didn't have it at the time. And the nice thing, of course, about those screwdrivers is they're solid all the way through. Like you can sharpen them and stuff. So, and the tips aren't bad. Just the screwdrivers themselves are like 20. I think the green was like 21, 25 plus tax sort of thing.
So Bronco notes the screwdriver needs to fit snugly into the notch on the screw head. Reshaping it with an Arkansas stone or sandpaper can help. And that's I do need to get a stone so I can do some of the reshaping on the tips. Because actually one of my watch heads in particular is, I think I could just sharpen it out. It's not too, but it's damaged a bit from all the movements that I've messed around with and worked on. I've started to, again, at the microscopic or in the loop level, you can start to see the damage that's been done just from wear and tear using those screwdrivers. Bronco likes pin and collars. He likes that they're easy to deal with. That's true. You don't know Loctite. Now, the thing is, I've seen the thing about the falling off the wrist. Like, I have never had a screw work itself loose. I've never had a cotter pin come out. I've never seen one even start to work out. And that's after I've broken the Loctite on the screws. Pin and collar, though, when I was putting the collars back in, if I didn't have the collar seated, I had the pin fall out twice on the Seiko. So for me, it was the worst experience. And I was like, okay, I gotta get out the loop. I feel like I'm using two hands more with that, with the pins and collars, putting them back in. Once I got it seated, yeah, rock solid. But I was just like, I don't know. Cotter pins shouldn't work loose, so that's why I like them. But I don't know, because I've seen people online talk about adding Loctite back to screws, like screws that had Loctite. I don't know what you're doing with your bracelet to work a screw loose. I've never had one budge on watches that I've repeatedly readjusted. But again, different brands may vary. And my experience has only been with a few of them. So, but no, yep, I've never added Loctite, and I've never had a screw work itself loose once I have hand tightened it down with a screwdriver. No, I've always had to use more resistance to readjust, like if I'm resizing it through, but I've never experienced that. But I've heard others who say they have, and again, it may depend on the manufacturer and what they've got. So yeah, I know a lot of people that like to use Loctite. Well, I would actually suggest using Loctite. And you can use a very, a reasonable one. It doesn't have to be, you've listed some of the, Von Pro listed some of the numbers earlier, like 222. Use that Loctite. I wouldn't have any qualms about it. But now, granted, I don't take all the screws out. So most of my screws are probably still held with some version of Loctite. It's usually just been like one of the end ones. I'm usually just removing links and going along, and if I had to remove more. So let's put that caveat on that. By and large, I can't think of an instance where I've had to resize up a watch. So most of mine are probably still Loctited, and I just didn't know that they had Loctite because it was easy to break. So, well, it's one of those interesting things. But no, I've personally never had a bad experience with, outside of when I've been making adjustments. They've always been okay afterwards, no matter what the system: pin and collar, cotter pin, screws, even in the Grand Seiko stupid baby screws, they were okay. I traded that watch too. So that's part of my trade. My trade in, for those that know my collection, which probably mostly none of you, my Black Bay Bronze, I traded. My Santos, I've traded. My Portuguese IWC, I've traded. My Grand Seiko, one of the older heritage models. It was a spring drive though. I traded that. And my GO. That one was the hardest one to decide on, the Glashütte, to trade it. But I was like, yeah, let's go ahead and trade those in. So I should have some information on that hopefully next week, assuming everything reviews well as they check up on those. I was actually trying to sell initially because the trade values, of course, are lower than what you can get selling wise, but you have to factor in your selling fees, assuming you're listing on a place to get a lot of exposure like eBay or Chrono, which is what I do, and shipping and insurance, of course, because you got to cover that sort of stuff, unless you want to add shipping in, but then that, it's the end price is the end price ultimately, no matter what. And then, of course, the time and the hassle of dealing with that. And there were a couple that I thought I could command better on, but it just, the offers were overseas. So the shipping costs then got to the point where it's like, well, I might as well do a trade and then reduce my sales tax burden on the new watch that I want. And I was just like, you know what, screw it. Let's just, themed with our bracelet discussion, just screw it, put them all in one box, bubble wrap them, and just deal with it. Glad to be done. So I've done trades before as well. It is convenient, and I've done sales as well, and it's nice to have cash. So pick your poison. I actually prefer selling on Chrono24 to eBay because the fees are quite a bit lower, and I like their escrow system. I feel safer selling on that site, but you do get a lot less eyeballs. The problem with Chrono24, as I digress to watch selling, like how does Dennis watch sell? The problem with Chrono24 is if the watch isn't in the system, good luck getting eyes on it. You can add a custom watch, but it's people just have to search like explicitly. So like I tried to sell my marathon watch on there, and it just marathon's not in the system at all. So you have to have someone go to Chrono24 and search for the word marathon, and then they'll see your watch. My Glashuta's in the system. My reference number, it was an older Panomatic Lunar, not the current lineup. The older ones aren't in the system. So, okay, at least the company was in the system, but I actually didn't let that one list because they didn't approve it right away, because I assumed they had to go and cross-reference to see that I wasn't lying about the reference number. Whereas on eBay, I could just get it up there. So I went and put that up on eBay, and that was easier, but eBay also didn't have that reference number, even though I think I've seen that reference on eBay before. So, you have to customize the thing and all that, but eBay's fees are pretty stiff. So, like eBay starts at like 15% for the first $1,000 of the watch. I think it goes down after that, but they do have their authentication service. But I had someone who wanted to buy the watch that I was going to sell to because the price was good, was fair. It was better than the other ones. I had it lower than other people listed. It was still significantly better than the trade, but they were overseas, and I had listed free U.S. shipping. And then I thought, oh well, it's okay because I'm going to ship to the authentication service, and then they're going to send it overseas. And then I looked, and it's like the buyer, the potential buyer, was from Vietnam, and then it's like, no, the authentication service won't send to Vietnam. And then I'm like, okay, well, I guess I could send it direct. How much is that shipping going to be? It's going to be about $70 higher than I expected. But then Vietnam has a 35% duty that the seller would have to pay because it's a luxury good. So I'm like, I had to cancel. He hadn't paid yet, but I felt bad because I'm like, I'm sorry. I had only factored in US shipping for this. And apparently I didn't disable the ability for someone without US shipping, even though I tagged it as free US shipping. But then the price would have been a lot higher because I'd have added in the 35%. I didn't know how to calculate it because I'm not a business. I don't know how to do that stuff. And I don't want to. So I was just like, I pulled the listing. I was just like, it's not worth it. And yes, Von Kroll, I agree. The 15%, I hate listing on eBay because it's such a take. But I mean, there are some other places you can list. You can list on Reddit. There's a sell watches subreddit. I follow it mostly because I just like to look at the pictures. I've never bought through them or sold through them. Watch You Seek. I know some people sell through there. I don't have enough posts on Watch You Seek. You have to have posted 100 times. And I didn't want to be one of those guys who just posts to post. I mostly just like to lurk and read Watch You Seek. I have like, I don't know, 20 posts there. And I've been there for, over a year. So yeah, it is what it is. I think Chrono24, I think is 6.5%. So it's not too bad. And then you can still like choose if you want to charge more for the shipping, just like with eBay, and have them pick that up. And if there's a sales tax, then Chrono takes care of that. And then the escrow service, it's the peace of mind of that is nice. So I can say like no returns because I'm not a business. I don't do returns. And they pay an escrow service. Once they get the watch, you put in the tracking number, it knows, and then they authorize the funds to go to you. And then if they don't authorize the funds to go to you, I had one instance where they didn't. I think he finally did, but it's like he forgot about it. After 15 days, you get it. You get the money because it's been confirmed through the delivery that they got the watch. So they do some other stuff to verify. They have you save some stuff, but it's a good. I actually like their system a lot. I just wish they would do a lot better getting watches in the system. And the problem with Chrono24 is it's biased to luxury watches. So like the Marathon wasn't in there. I have a couple of Mr. Jones watches. I did some searches to see like that company's not there. So people can list them, but it's not easy to find. And I ran into a similar, I haven't sold my Mr. Jones watches, but I ran into a similar situation on a different brand that I was selling. I think I ended up selling through, well, I sold the Marathon through eBay, but I really struggled with another one of the watches. I can't remember which one I sold on there. Whereas like my Tudor 1926, I sold it in 2 days because Tudor's in the system, 1926 is in the system. Real easy for people to browse by category and find it. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream because I'm going to go get lunch. Thank you everyone who was able to tune in live. Thank you, Vronkroll, in particular, for all the information about Loctite. I actually think I'm going to search for some 222 to add to my watch maintenance collection, so I have some because I actually don't own any of that. And those of you watching the recording, feel free to comment on anything you thought was interesting. I know I've built this as a Seiko discussion, and then the latter half was a just generalized watch discussion. That's kind of the fun of doing the live streams. And I probably will have some more pre-recorded videos here this month as we see more watch announcements. I'm able to sometimes sit down during the day, take a break, download the press release photos, and put a video together. And people seem to like to have those sort of first thought videos. Obviously, it depends on the popularity of the brand, but I'll plan to do those. And then with Watches and Wonders, I'll do my best. I'm actually at a work conference that week, so at least for the start of Watches and Wonders, so I might be a little slow because I'm going to be out of town. But I'll do my best, and hopefully we will have a few more live streams. I'm going to probably put together another this or that here coming up soon. I've had some interest. I know Tony, who's been on all of them, he actually really enjoys doing those. And has asked me about the next one and ways to do the next one, and we had some people who are in the Watches with Dennis Club, which I guess I should plug the links in the video description, but that's 99 cents a month. It gets you some emojis. That's what they're called. And other than that, it's just a way you can support the channel. But I did a poll with them about things they wanted me to cover. And one of the things was some adjustments to the this or that. So we might see about finding some other watch collectors. If any of you ever want to be on it, by the way, the easiest way would be to email me, watcheswithdennis@gmail.com. Super hard to remember. It's in the about section also. If you're interested, all you need is a microphone, a headset, and a webcam. And you can have a headset mic. You need a headset, though, because speakers will bleed over through this StreamYard software. But one of the things was having more knowledgeable collectors on. And some of you here who are in the chat, like Obese Tuna and Vronkroll, you guys are knowledgeable about watches. If you want to do that, it's super laid back and casual. If you've ever seen them, it's real easy. We just give our opinions on watches and talk about it. And the rules are like, don't swear too much because YouTube doesn't like that. Don't smoke on. I work in public health, so don't smoke on camera. That's about it in terms of my rules. So anyway, if you're interested in doing this or that, or being on like one of these, it's real easy to bring people in and out of this stuff. I always forget to suggest it because I never really do it, but I'm always open to it. So if you guys want to just have a conversation and not just participate in the chat, just let me know. I'm more than happy to bring in more talking heads in the Hollywood Square style, and we can have some fun with it. But anyway, I'll end it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll say take care, everybody.